Hello everyone, I'm Kadri Kalle from Let's Do It Foundation, and in this video I'm talking about the clever stories of greenwashing. You may have already watched a video by Enzo where he talked about the basics of greenwashing. Here we're gonna dig a little bit deeper on the narrative and stories. So let's get started. You probably are all familiar with this image and this issue. We have beaches full of plastic waste. We do the cleanups, but the plastic waste is there again the next day and so on. So who should take care of this problem? But maybe before that, we should even ask what's the actual solution for this problem, how we can stop it. We can do the cleanups, but we know that this is not a long-term solution. But before even that, maybe the question we should ask is, what's the problem here actually? Where does it all come from? Why is the waste there? If we want to look at it, then we see that this fact that beaches are full of plastic actually comes from many reasons. One of them is that maybe there's a lack of waste collection. For example, there are not enough trash bins. There is no proper waste collection system in the city or in the country even. So this means that this waste is not collected. Connected to that also, it could be that there is lack of waste management or recycling, or the products could be also even not possible to recycle. So we also see that this kind of system to manage this waste is not there. On the other hand, what we see also that at the same time, these products are sold everywhere and every day. So because they are single-use items, people use them a lot, they are sold everywhere, they end up, well, if you don't have waste collection, then they end up on the beaches and in the nature. And also connected to that, not only are these products sold everywhere, they're also produced and marketed by the companies without thinking what happens with the waste. So they just want to sell their products and they don't really care what happens with it and if the country where they're sold is able to handle that waste. And on top of that, this also means that has actually been the business model for decades. So companies are used to not thinking about it, and they're comfortable with it, and it's nice for them, and they just produce their things and let someone else worry about the waste. So this is the situation where we are now. And of course, we know that the systemic solution for this is what we talked about in zero waste. First of all, it's the reduce. So because we are producing these things so much, and maybe the problem is also that the recycling capacity is not big enough to handle all these amounts of single-use bottles ending up on beaches every day. So the first solution is to produce a lot less of these things, which is connected to the second one, which is reuse, which means that we should be creating more of products that can be reused. Like, for example, for bottles, they can be refilled, but that also means that there should be some sort of take back system that you have some sort of collection point where you can take your bottles and they will be taken to the company who then fills them again and puts them back on the shops. So this is the second option. And of course, after many times of reusing, the materials probably need to go to the recycling. So the materials that these packages are made of need to be recyclable in many different conditions and in many different countries. For example, maybe some countries, the technologies are not so advanced, so they cannot recycle all types of materials. So there's a difference between making a material recyclable so that it can be recycled in a very specific condition versus actually having suitable recycling possibilities for many different technologies. And this all means that there is a need to really redesign all the systems because we don't really have a lot of these at the moment. So that means that we need to create these large-scale reuse and recycling possibilities. And if you imagine how less there are these possibilities at the moment, for example, reusing your packages or bottles, then you also understand how big change it is to actually create these things. So these big companies, it's like creating new cities with this whole infrastructure and so on. So when we come to the root problem is that this change is difficult to do because it has a lot of complexity and it's also expensive. It's not easy, it doesn't come fast. So what this means that it's also especially difficult if you're a really big company. Like if we also say that it takes a lot of more effort and time to turn around a big boat or ship than a small boat. So it's also the same for companies. The bigger the company, the more difficult it is. Of course, they also have more resources to do it. But this situation means that the companies tend to find ways how to change less because they want to feel comfortable. Maybe they don't want to get all the difficult process started. So they tend to shift this responsibility to someone else, often us, the consumers. So here's an example of newspaper title from last year where Coca-Cola said that, you cannot reduce or get rid of the plastic bottles because people want them. We're just giving our customers what they want, and we are just, making their lives better. So this is what we're doing. The consumers, they are the one who decide. But if you look now of the whole picture here, is that the start of the whole thing is that too many things are produced. There's overproduction of these single-use plastic items, which of course also means that there is overconsumption. We are consuming too much of these things because everything is in single-use packaging, and this is how the system is set up. An extra thing is that many of these single-use items are not even graded to be recyclable. So this is another complexity. If we add there that maybe there's not even this proper waste collection system where to send this waste, then of course the end result is that we have plastic waste, or we can even call it plastic pollution in the nature. If we have now the producer or the big company here, what are their options? Of course, what we said before, they can change the production to reuse systems. So they would produce less things, they would be reusable, it would help the whole system and less problems will be created. Or they can support the beach cleanup, which is, if we compare money-wise, costs a lot less for them. They don't actually have to do anything themselves. They just pay the volunteer groups who will do the cleaning. They can put their logo in there. They have much more visibility rather than if they would be, doing something with their technologies, which is not so visible. So of course they want to do the easy thing and support the cleanup, but that doesn't really change the problem at the core. So what we can see here also in this illustration, which you maybe have seen, is that what the companies are doing is that they're like this tap where the water is flowing. They keep producing these plastic items, and then we have some recycling happening here on the other hand, also the cleanups where the people are trying to put the materials back into the circulation, into this bathtub. But this is overflowing because you cannot really fight with this tap which is running so fast. So the only solution is to turn off the tap if we really want change to happen, and focusing really on putting the water back into the tap is not really good for long term. What this means for cleanups is that it's still okay to do a cleanup because it works as an awareness raising tool. There are still people who maybe are not aware that we have so much plastic in the nature. So you can still do a community cleanup to make people more aware of the problem. But in doing cleanups, there's a big difference if the cleanup is done by you as an active citizen in your community or like a community group, or you are a big multinational company who can actually change the production of these things, who can change the material. And has so much more power into this whole solution than just helping you with your cleanup. So what also happens is that, like I said, this kind of activity can also shift away the focus. The companies are saying that, okay, we are also already doing something. We are helping you with the cleanup. But this shifts away the focus on the real solution that they should be focusing on, which is reducing this single-use plastics production and putting more reusables on the market. So if you also see now some of the examples of the stories that companies are telling, that you can see how they are manipulating with us and putting the blame on us, is that, for example, what we already said, we are offering people what they want. So we are just pleasing our customers. We are like, people want these single-use plastics. We are giving them that. Then it's consumer responsibility to do the right thing and put the trash in the bin. So, we are just producing things we cannot control. People are trashing. It's bad behavior by people. This is none of our business. And then they're also saying, okay, but we are also making our products more recyclable. So we are doing some extra steps. So we are doing good things. When we look at now, the real life is that we already seen, these advertisements by these companies, and we know how much money they put into selling products to people. So what's the story is with big companies is that they can actually make people buy whatever they want. So saying that we're offering people what they want, they can change. People can choose between the products that are there on the market. So they have a big say in this. When now the consumer responsibility, well, it's also corporations' responsibility to produce things that can be managed properly. And if they are producing things for a country where there is no good waste collection, then, saying that the consumer is doing not the right thing when there is not even a possibility to do the right thing is also not really fair. And then the recyclability, again, making things recyclable means also that there should be possibility to actually recycle it. There should be the factories, the facilities, the logistics that collects it. So if we are doing that in a country that lacks all those things, then this is also a poor responsibility from the corporation side, because they know that this recycling cannot happen, because also we talked that maybe the capacity is not enough. These products are created in such a fast pace that we simply cannot manage all this waste. Now, when we look at this, what happens even behind the scenes is that in their companies are actually even like aggressively fighting against the solutions. Not only are they shifting the blame on publicly to consumers, but they actually are not agreeing or going along with the good solutions. So there is an example from a few years ago where there was in Scotland, they wanted to adopt this new solution, which is called the bottle return scheme, which means that with every bottle, the consumer puts a little deposit money for the bottle and then takes the bottle back to a collection point, gets the money back, and then these bottles are either reused or recycled, so they are back in the system. And it was shown that Coca-Cola actually in their internal documents was fighting against this solution, because it meant that they had to play a much bigger role. They would have to finance setting up this system, and they really didn't want that. So behind the scenes, they're actually like even lying about this, that they're part of the solution, although in the backseat they are against these solutions. So what is important now is that how to tell a difference between good solutions and greenwashing solution is that it actually comes down to asking a bunch of critical questions when you see a good solution and going more into the details. So for example, who is proposing this solution? How much power do they have to change things? So again, if we're talking about the really big multinational corporation, they are big, but they have a lot of money and they have a lot of research power as well. So probably they can change quite big things. The second question is that, will this solution help us to use less resources in total? For example, if we take any single-use items, like we can change the material of the item, but if it's still single-use item, this means that we still need to keep on producing them the same amount. The next question is a bit similar, is will this new solution help to prolong the life of this product? Again, we can use the single-use item here as example. if you're just creating another single-use item from different material, the lifespan of this material or this item is still the same, but it's maybe product that the source is renewable or something, but the product itself doesn't last any longer. It's still just for one use. And then connected to the recycling and is there infrastructure. So yes, so maybe this solution is using some really fancy type of recycling or whatever management solution. So then we really have to ask, do we have infrastructure to manage this waste here? Maybe it's only possible in few countries in Europe or the United States. So this is, again, maybe not really fit for it. For example, I don't know, compostable plastics, which need industrial composting, which is not even present in many European countries. And finally, also, what actually happens with the waste and where does it end up? And is it safe for us and for the environment? Maybe there are some hazardous chemicals in it that again, maybe some types of plastics that seem really nice, but maybe they have added something in there which leaks, I don't know, microplastics or some chemicals into the soil or into the water, which doesn't really make this a safe product for human health or environment. So now we can try to find, I'm going to give you an example based on this nice bottle, again, from Coca-Cola to practice this question. So we see Coca-Cola is proposing this solution. Like I said, they're a really big company. They can do good big things if they really want to. They have a lot of power. So they have proposed here a plant bottle, which seems to be recyclable bottle, where they have 30% of this plastic is plant-based. So this means that 70% is usual oil-based plastic and 30% is plant-based. So, okay, this seems like a good thing because they are using less oil-based plastic. So maybe this is a good aspect of it. But then if we start to look into it, okay, but the use of the bottle is still the same. It doesn't really make this bottle more usable for a longer time. This recycling process, mixing oil-based plastic and plant-based plastic, it looks very difficult. So if you think about the infrastructure question, like we don't really know if this kind of fancy recycling is possible in our community, in our country. I don't even know if it's possible in many countries in Europe. So this raises questions. Also, mixing plant-based and oil-based plastics, we are not really sure if it prolongs the life of this bottle. How many times can it be recycled? Does it need to be added maybe new plastic to it with every recycling process? So we don't really know about it. So we have a lot of new questions here. And we see that most of the answers to the questions here are, let's say, they're not really assuring us that this is a good sustainable solution. Now we can either go and find out more if we can find the good answers to our questions, or I would say that every time if the answers to the questions we're asking are leaving us in doubt, that it means that there's a reason to maybe not consider this as a good sustainable solution, but rather think that maybe there's greenwashing involved. In case of this bottle, there is a note that it is quite difficult to recycle this type of bottle. It doesn't change anything in the way how many bottles are produced. They're still producing a lot of Coca-Cola bottles despite this different technology. So it doesn't really solve the problem in whole. It just makes it seem that it's better because they have reduced oil-based plastic content. But in the end, this is not really solving any of the big problems that we discussed before. Now, to the end, I would leave you also an example for you to practice on. You can pause the video, write down the questions, and try the questions on these examples. So this is a company, Plantastic, that makes biodegradable straws and some other items. They are operating in Thailand. So you can try to see what kind of answers do you get to questions on this example, and if it looks like a greenwashing or good solution to you. And the last thing I would encourage you to do is make asking questions a daily practice. whenever you see a solution, even if you know it's a good solution, you can try to practice questions there as well, just to get to the rhythm of asking these questions every time you see a solution, and not just trust the nice images and pictures and people smiling and telling how good it is. So question everything that you see, and only if you have done through this asking exercise, you can trust if it's a good solution or not, or if you need to actually investigate more. I thank you for listening.